Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how wheel shape affects how your skateboard feels. So we have 6 different wheels, all with slight differences and coming from the Spitfire Formula 4 lineup. So first let's start with my favorite wheel shape, and that is the Classic. So as we can see here on this board, it has a very round edge. These nice round edges, they do a couple of things. The first is when you're flipping your board, it makes your board flip over a little bit easier. It kind of rolls over with less resistance. And the second thing that I really like about the Classic is when you're grinding across a ledge, like in a pinched grind, like a feeble grind or a crooked grind. You don't usually feeble grind ledges very often, but when you're doing a crooked grind or a feeble grind on flat bars or even a 50-50 on transition, you'll notice that the round edge of the wheel gives you less resistance, so you're grinding a little smoother and faster. The downside, however, to such a rounded edge is that it's easier to slip off of things like flat bars, rounded over ledges, or coping. So what can be a pro is also sometimes a con. And now that you have a general understanding of how it can affect your performance, let's get into what these are. So this is a nice big 58mm Classic. One of the benefits to riding a really large diameter wheel like a 58 is that there is a lot more flat surface right here, and that's going to start to improve the lock-in of a Classic shaped wheel. So you can still have those nice round edges that grind really smooth, but once you start getting into big diameters, they lock a lot better. Unlike my tiny little 51mm wheels. Not the best lock-in, but once your trucks get ground down, they work pretty well. So let's get into one of the next most popular shapes, and that would be a Conical Full. So the Conical Full just has a conical cut right here. It's almost like somebody did a 45-degree cut on the edge of the wheel right here, and then it's cut in a little bit here. So the Conical is a really appealing wheel. A lot of people enjoy riding these. And being a full, that makes it extra wide. So if we compare these two 58s, you can see that the Conical Full looks much, much wider. There's a lot more wheel here. One of the downsides to having so much more wheel is they start to get pretty heavy. So you'll notice that these flip around easier and they're a lot lighter. So if you've been riding Classics for a long time and you switch to a Conical Full, one of the first things you're going to notice is this massive riding surface. So if you're riding on rough ground, that really spreads out those bumps, lumps, cracks, rocks, all sorts of little things. So you're going to notice you have a lot more speed and your board feels a lot less shaky on a really wide wheel. I think that's one of the reasons they've become so popular is people just enjoy riding such big, smooth wheels. Me personally, I find that these are just too heavy and they make my board feel awkward, so that's why I stick to Classics, but I understand why Conical Fulls are such a popular choice. And because that radius is so small, there's also a lot more surface on the side, which means that it's going to lock in better on coping, ledges, rounded over curbs. It just gives you a much more of a right angle there to lock in with. Now again, one of the downsides to having such a tall sidewall on your wheel, this sounds like tires, I know, but there are some similarities. Let's start calling it a sidewall. So having a tall kind of 90-degree to your truck sidewall, skateboard tire, it adds a lot of resistance when you're grinding. Great lock, but you can even hear it sometimes on a flat bar feeble grind. It'll squeal, or on coping, you can just feel it kind of dragging and rubbing. So they did make another wheel to kind of address that, in my opinion. It may not have been to address that, maybe it's just how people want it to look, but the radials. So a Spitfire Radial still has a very wide riding surface, but instead of having kind of a 45-degree cut, it has more of a rounded over edge on your skateboard tire sidewalls. Now this one happens to be a Radial Full, so it's a very wide one, and they do also make a Radial Slim. I haven't seen any of those in years because wide wheels are trending right now, but I did ride Radial Slims in the past. They're very similar to tablets that we'll get into in a bit, except with a more rounded edge. So again, a smoother grind, and it flips over a little bit quicker when you're doing your flip tricks. I actually thought the Radial Slim was my second favorite performing wheel after Classics. And part of the thing is, honestly, I just like looking down at a round wheel. That's the shape that I've ridden for my entire life, so that has a lot to do with it. Whereas the radials start to get more rectangular shape. Getting into a rectangular shaped wheel though, we have the tablets. Now these ones have such a 90-degree sidewall. Even right here where the bearing sits, you can see that it's basically 90-degree cut in right here. So the tablet is definitely for the rectangular wheel lover, but what I would say about them is that they are slimmer compared to a conical full. The tablets definitely have less weight to them, but they get really good lock-in and they have a pretty wide riding surface considering how narrow the wheel actually is. So the advantage to riding a tablet would be keeping your speed pretty well while having a really good lock-in. The disadvantage to a tablet, in my opinion, is aesthetically, I don't actually like them. Again, I like a very rounded surface, so when I look down, I don't feel like I'm looking at my skateboard. And the other downside is, again, because it is such a dramatically sharp angle, there's going to be a lot of resistance while doing your very well locked in grinds. Now, even though these four wheels look different, they do all have something in common. They are all symmetrical. So about 5 years ago, I started to notice asymmetrical wheels coming in, with lock-ins being the first one. It's possible that these have been around for a while, maybe since the 80s they had shapes like this, but the lock-ins were the first one I saw. So what the lock-ins have is a very square cut edge, very similar to a tablet, although I think it's a bit rounder just looking at it, and then they have a conical side here. They also tend to be a pretty wide wheel. I'd say they're on par with conical fulls. So they're a very heavy wheel, but you get the aesthetic of a conical wheel with the lock-in of something like a tablet. In practice, I've found these to be a smooth, fast-riding wheel, quite heavy, again, very good lock-in. The rollover on flip tricks is on par with a conical full, and again, the weight is on par with a conical full, but they are an interesting wheel. They at least introduce a new idea into skateboard wheels that they can be asymmetrical. And taking that to new heights is the new Ishod wheel. So what we have here is a very flat sidewall skateboard tire. Are you guys getting tired of that one yet? Sorry, I'm just enjoying it. And the outside is a classic wheel. So this is interesting because it's acknowledging that the outside of the wheel has an effect on how the board flips. Like I've mentioned, I find that it tends to roll over a little easier. Like if I'm doing a kickflip, it starts kickflipping right away. Whereas when I'm skating something like a conical, I find that it almost feels like the board gets in the air before it starts flipping. So I feel like I have a more controlled flip on a round edge wheel. However, it feels like it flips faster when I have a very square wheel. So this is a nod to that, acknowledging that some people like to have the outside of their wheel be round, but it gives you the incredible lock-in ability of something like a tablet. I haven't tried these yet. I might someday, but for now, I'm pretty happy just riding classics. I have changed a lot of things over the years about my setup, but I find that the one constant has been 52 to 51 millimeter Formula 4 Spitfire Classics. I just don't stray away from that. Durometer, I'll ride 99 or 101. It doesn't really make a big difference to me. And durometer is actually a subject for a whole other video. But I hope you at least have a better understanding of how the shape of a wheel can affect how your skateboard feels. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one, which will most likely be durometer, because there have definitely been some interesting developments in wheel durometer in the last few years. Till the next one.